and Assurance Standards Board, the IAASB, issued ISAE 3000 revised, assurance engagements other than audits or reviews of historical financial information. This is hardly a title that a marketing department would approve of, especially as assurance reports have to include a statement that the engagement was performed in accordance with it. Why not just say ISAE 3000 Assurance Engagements? The longer title might be more intellectually accurate, but it's not fully so, and it is, after all, just a title. It had me worried for years that the only mention of independence in an auditor's report is just in its title, but at least that's about to change. ISAE 3000 is one of the non-audit standards issued by the IAASB. Other non-audit standards are those for reviews, which are also assurance, and compilations, which are not strictly assurance in a theoretical way. Compilations, or accounts preparation engagements, can increase user confidence because users know a professional accountant in public practice is prepared to put their name to the financial statements. In the rest of this video, I'm generally going to refer to professional accountants in public practice as practitioners. At the same time as ISAE 3000, the IAASB reissued the International Framework for Assurance Engagements and made some related conforming amendments to other standards. The International Framework for Assurance Engagements is not itself a standard. It doesn't contain requirements that must be followed. What it does is establish the language and concepts that you'll find in standards for reviews, other assurance, and indeed for audits. Readers of international standards on auditing will be unlikely to refer to the framework, and that's probably also the case for those carrying out reviews or other assurance. Nevertheless, when revising ISAE 3000, the IAASB had to carefully consider whether any of the revisions should be reflected back into the framework. The very fact that it is now reissued flags up that changes have indeed been made. Even though the framework is not directly relevant to protect practitioners, it is nevertheless important to study it, to gain an understanding of audit and assurance up to an advanced level. Why did ISAE 3000 need to be revised? The first and obvious reason is simply its age. Over 10 years, it would be surprising if circumstances had not changed sufficiently to require an update. In that time, we've experienced a global financial crisis and widespread changes in business and society. For example, as I recorded this video, one of the notable anniversaries being celebrated was 10 years since the birth of Facebook social networking. In terms of standard setting, the main drivers for change were the need to conform the document to the clarity style adopted for International Standards on Auditing, ISAs, and recognition that as assurance is becoming more important in its own right, it was no longer appropriate to assume that assurance was only done by auditors. This last point drove the inclusion of much material from ISAs that would before have been taken for granted as part of the practitioner's knowledge. The revision also recognised that the standard could be picked up and used by those who are not practitioners. To refer to these parties, which might for example be a firm of environmental consultants, the standard uses the term competent practitioner other than a professional accountant in public practice. These competent practitioners can only say that their work is in accordance with the standard if, however, they comply with quality control and ethical standards that are at least equivalent to those that apply to practitioners. ISAE 3000 is often referred to as an umbrella standard, the idea being that it's used together with any subject matter specific ISAEs that are relevant to a particular engagement. If there isn't a subject matter specific ISAE, then ISAE 3000 can be used on its own. The other ISAEs currently in issue are 3400, the examination of prospective financial information, 3402, assurance reports on controls at a service organisation. 3410, assurance engagements on greenhouse gas statements. And 3420, assurance engagements to report on the compilation of pro forma financial information included in a prospectus. The revision project for ISAE 3000 had to include consideration of how it fitted together with such subject matter specific ISAEs. This was particularly important because of the decision to include material that reflected what was in ISAs. For example, topics such as planning, using the work of experts and documentation. There was even debate over whether separate ISAEs were needed for such topics, but that idea was not taken forwards. The revisions project didn't just apply the Clarity drafting conventions to the old ISAE 3000. It had to take account changes to international standards on auditing over the last 10 years. These have been substantial and included fundamental changes to the audit risk model and the introduction of a new standard for group audits. There were several technical areas that generated a lot of debate during the project. I'll cover 3 of these now. The first is the boundaries of the project. Second is the treatment of reasonable assurance and limited assurance. And the third is the application of the standard to what are termed direct engagements. In part, because the project was being carried out at the same time as the project to revise the standard for review engagements, commentators raised concerns about the concepts. If you want to research this further, a good starting point is the agenda papers for the June 2012 meeting of the IAASB. It was decided that it was outside the boundaries of the project to substantially revisit framework concepts, and that the most that could be done was to improve the clarity of the framework for assurance engagements. Fundamentally, this means that in some people's eyes, the resulting standard is flawed. But to put that right will require a separate, wide-reaching project for the IAASB to revisit the whole of its thinking about assurance and the way that standards are set. Reasonable and limited assurance have been sensibly treated in ISAE 3000. Reasonable assurance is what an audit provides. I sometimes refer to this as investment grade assurance. Limited assurance, by contrast, is literally any assurance that does not amount to reasonable assurance. ISAE 3000 insists that an assurance engagement is not to be undertaken unless the limited assurance is meaningful. The standard defines meaningful as enhancing confidence to a degree that is clearly more than inconsequential. I think the practical definition would be that it is not only clearly more than inconsequential, but that it's worth paying for. Having set out the upper and lower limits for limited assurance, ISAE 3000 doesn't waste time exploring the achieved level of assurance. It's up to users to make up their own minds whether what the practitioner does provides the assurance they need. Given that ISAE 3000 can be applied to a wide range of engagements, I think the biggest challenge for practitioners will be reporting in such a way that users have a reasonable appreciation of just how much limited assurance they're receiving. That brings me to direct engagements. In a direct engagement, the practitioner essentially prepares the information